1984, at the Dutchess County Infirmary. Louise Tompkins, Town of Washington Historical, and Norman Lane, a patient at the Dutchess County Infirmary who had worked as a gardener for FDR Roosevelt for 45 years, will give a talk on their reminiscence of Franklin Delano and Eleanor Roosevelt.
We're going to have a loudspeaker here.
Now, can you hear? Is this loud enough?
No.
Do you remember how you got the volume on? Okay.
And good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to see all you beautiful people here tonight because we have a very interesting VIP to tell you many things. And I will introduce him first, and that's Norman Lane. He's the only man in the world that had the honor of digging Theodore Roosevelt, not Theodore, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grave. He dug it 6 feet long and 6 feet deep and 3 feet wide in the rose garden that Roosevelt himself picked for his gravesite. And he also dug the graves of the president's 2 favorite dogs, Chief, a hound, and Little Fella. He wanted them always to be near their master. Wasn't that touching? And they had their own little tombstones and everything. Well, I was telling a volunteer last year about Norman and how he dug the grave of the dog and the president, and the volunteer said, why didn't you dig Mrs. Roosevelt's grave? I said, well, he would have to shoot her first. She wasn't dead yet. Well, anyway, our Norman here was born in Millbrook, the son of Mr. and Mrs. William Lane. And Mr. Lane secured a position on the New York Central Railroad and moved to Hyde Park. And Norman grew up just about a stone's throw from that lovely St. James Church that just had a fire. He went there all his early life to Sunday school. And he also, when he was in his late teens and early 20s, took up boxing. And he was really a marvelous amateur boxer. And he could pow, and he won the nickname of Knockout Lane. And later on, though, he wanted to get a job over at Mr. Roosevelt's greenhouse. And Norman, how did you happen to come there to the greenhouse, and who was your boss? You start talking now.
I heard that they wanted to hire somebody down to Franklin D. Roosevelt, and I went and seen the boss that I knew, because him and I went to school together, and he was the superintendent over the laborers. And I went down and he hired me, and I worked there 30 years to the day I retired. I dug Franklin D.'s grave, I dug Fowler's grave, and Chief's grave, these 2 dogs.
And also, they told you wouldn't stay there for, a week, and you stayed there 30 years, right?
I worked there 30 years and retired from there.
And do you remember all the famous people that came to the garden, to the rose garden?
I've seen people from all over the world come there.
And how many rose beds did you have in it?
18 rose beds.
All kinds of roses.
All kinds of roses.
And Mr. Roosevelt's favorite rose was the yellow rose. Did you pick him many bouquets of the yellow rose?
Well, we never picked any of the roses at all for the home or anything else.
And also, you had in the greenhouse you had rose beds, didn't you?
That's right.
You had flowers all winter. And what did he do when it got to be Christmas time? What plants did you grow then?
everything was grown in the greenhouse.
And-
Just the same as what was grown on the outside.
And you grew poinsettia for every single church, 7 churches around.
We grew poinsettias and put 8 poinsettias in each one of the churches in Hyde Park.
And then when it came Easter, you put Easter lilies.
8 Easter lilies in each one of the churches.
And all the workers, employees had one too.
That's right.
Wasn't that nice? Mr. Roosevelt and the Roosevelt family were wonderful people. When they came into the garden, when Mr. Roosevelt came into the garden with Mrs. Roosevelt and a nurse, he was in a wheelchair, what did he do? Show him how you raise...
We'd be working out there in the rose garden, and this Franklin D would come in there with his nurse, he'd hoo-hoo, and beckon to us boys come down, and he'd tell us how nice it looked, what a wonderful job we were doing.
Wasn't that wonderful? You wouldn't see a important person like that doing that very often. And the boys were always so nice. They used to come right up to the garden on horseback, didn't they?
Yeah.
And that was very nice.
Yeah, they'd come in there and they'd talk to us the same as anybody else would.
And Mrs. Roosevelt was lovely too, wasn't she?
That's right.
And what was your favorite time of the year in the rose garden when all the roses were out? How did you like it when you went in the rose garden in the morning when all the roses were out? Norman, you liked it, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
Just like a little bit of heaven it was.
Yeah.
Yes. And Mr. Roosevelt, being such a very nice, kind man to all his employees, how much did you get paid a month then?
I worked there and got $30 a month.
And you had a vacation with pay, didn't you?
Yeah.
That was good. And Mr. Norman had a family, 4 boys and 2 girls, right?
That's right.
He hasn't counted up his grandchildren lately, but I suppose he's got a pretty good score by now. And Mr. Roosevelt was the only man who was ever elected 4 times the presidency of the United States. And that's a wonderful honor. And also, Mr. Roosevelt, I'm 76 years old, and the greatest piece of legislation to help the working man that has been passed in my lifetime was in 1937 when Mr. Roosevelt passed the Social Security law. It's wonderful, because when I first came here to the county infirmary 45 years ago, nobody had anything. And now, everybody has got some Social Security or some disability money so that they have something. And I think that Mr. Roosevelt was a very wonderful man. He gave fireside chats, and he encouraged the American people, and he said the only thing they had to fear was fear. And with the help of God, he always read something out of the Bible, we would get by, and we did. And when Mr. Roosevelt died and he was buried, you know, they had a military guard round his grave for 24 hours a day. Somebody asked them about why did they have that guard all night too. And they said, well, we're afraid Mr. Roosevelt might get up and run for a 5th term. But I think the real reason was people thought so much of Mr. Roosevelt that they came with flower pots and little baskets and dug up plants and dug up earth to plant their own personal plants in and at home. And if they, I don't know, maybe they would have dug up Mr. Roosevelt if they kept on like that. So that's why I think they even have that guard now. Do they, Norman, have a guard yet?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
24 hours a day.
And it was wonderful tell us more about that greenhouse. Can you think of anything more?
No.
Well, it was beautiful. The rose garden went all summer, and the greenhouse all winter. For 30 years he stayed there, and was very happy, enjoyed every minute of it. And they told him in the beginning he wouldn't work there for, how long was it?
I wouldn't work there a month and I'd quit.
And he stayed 30 years, how's that? And he enjoyed every minute of it. And it's still a beautiful place over there, and I hope that we'll always remember it, because I had the privilege of hearing Mr. Roosevelt in person when I was a patient at the Newington home out in Newington, Connecticut in 1930. We had a big auditorium dedicated, and our superintendent in those days, Miss Louise, was very fond of Mr. Roosevelt, because when he had polio, he engineered the building of a therapeutic pool down in in Florida, Warm Springs. And at Newington, they didn't have it built that time to dedicate it, but they had built the first therapeutic pool, sticks on my tongue, in the country right there. And it was wonderful. I used to swim in it. But that was a year later. In 1930, he was the governor of New York. And Miss Lee invited him over to dedicate the big auditorium there. He got off the road and got over to Glastonbury. I was in bed there. They had quite a few patients down right in their beds if they couldn't get up. And they must have had at least 75 crippled people in wheelchairs, on crutches and everything. And we were waiting, and oh, what has happened? He got off the road, but he got there finally. And he came in on the back of the stage. We were right in front of a big stage, and they had on the stage, they had a big chair, several other chairs, and pretty soon Franklin Roosevelt came in walking on crutches, and he was going like this, slowly, and had a great big trooper beside him, but he didn't help him. And Mrs. Roosevelt was with him, and she had a very unusual hat on. It reminded me of a peach basket turned upside down and had lace all around it, very pretty. And when he got over to that big chair, he sat down. The trooper helped him to sit down, and then Miss Lee introduced him and told everybody about him, and then he got up to make a speech. I can't remember a word he said, but when he came slowly across that platform, his face lit up as though he had a light behind it. It was beautiful. And he began to speak, and he just put the pep and the inspiration and the hope and faith in God in our hearts. And we decided we're going to do it and make a go of it in spite of our crippled condition. And he just stimulated every one of those kids there and people that they were going to make something of themselves, and they did. One of the boys, Frank Fulbrook, went to college and came back as a manager of the whole institution there at Newington. He's gone to be with the Lord now, but he made good, several of them. And there's one girl who went to be, studied to be a hospital librarian. And she, Rose Sidonio, she came to Poughkeepsie, years ago, and she set up the hospital library there in Poughkeepsie. And she used to come out and see me. Well, Rosie kept track of me all these years, and she now lives in New York in an apartment where she can see the ocean. She loves to swim, and so did I. And she writes to me every once in a while. But she has always kept that inspiration and that faith, and she made a success of her life. And you know, that's too bad. A lot of the brain power of crippled people is wasted because they don't have that that chance to study. It used to be that people hid away that crippled people, were ashamed of them, and wouldn't have them out. And they didn't have anything in school that they could learn much, and a lot was lost. But now, Miss Lee, I think, was one of the first ones. Why, a family would bring an old dress or something that was somebody's cast off for the kids. Oh, it's good enough for crippled kids. Oh boy, she would get mad and she would send it right back. She had every one of those kids dressed up, and they came to a hospital school with hair ribbons and pretty dresses and all dressed up right in bed. And we were so glad Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave the inspiration to all those kids. And right to this day, I can think back and I think of that light behind his face, the inspiration. And it works, you know. Life is sweet, folks, no matter how. And it's so very versatile and so very complicated. There's always something else to learn that's very interesting. And look how he became, with all that crippled condition, he became the only president in the whole history of the country to be elected 4 times. Wasn't that wonderful? And I'm so glad I could hear him that time. I'm so glad for all he did for the crippled people in that institution, and that with these March of Dimes that he created, you know, it came from him. And all of it he's done all these years. And I'm very proud that this man right here did so much for him and was able to tell us of the wonderful aspects of his character, how he would speak to them all, do so much for them, and everything has worked out beautifully. And his grave site is being kept up, and I hope people will never forget, because you know, in the last Depression, you probably, some of you, remember the 1929 Depression. You're kind of young for that, but it was bad. And when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president, he got all these unemployed people into a civilian corps and public works administration, and the public works people built the beautiful park that we have enjoyed ever since. Right here in Poughkeepsie, he built one. I think he built the high school, didn't he? With the public works. And he did so much and got people going, got money started again going. And I like to think about him. And I'm very happy to have a chance to tell you all about him again. And is there anybody else here who would like to say something about Mr. Roosevelt? Did anybody else here ever meet him? Don't all speak at once.
No, I guess not.
No?
Franklin Roosevelt spoke at Washington Hollow at what is now the State Troopers Barracks. Came there, I think at that time there was still a racetrack, wasn't there? And maybe some of the old fair buildings. I think he was campaigning for governorship. This was in the early 30s.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was the governor in 1930.
Wendell and I were engaged.
Oh, boy.
I wanted, and this has always amused me. My father and mother were very rock-bound Republicans, so they wouldn't come to hear Franklin Roosevelt. But they drove up in the Washington Hollow Cemetery, which of course is high above Washington Hollow, so they were able to see. They would not. It's always amused me to think of it. Mrs. Roosevelt spoke at Millbrook High School one time.
She did.
And the public was invited to come, I think especially the parents, and at that time we had a child in the high school. I took along the wife of our farm employee, a black woman, and I think it was one of the high points of her whole life at that time. We stood in the lobby afterwards. The kids had all gone back to their classrooms. Mrs. Roosevelt came down from where she was speaking and came over and said, "I'm so glad you could come." I said, "I'm Eleanor Roosevelt." Introduced herself, we introduced ourselves, shook hands with Mrs. Roosevelt.
You know,
It was.
I think I better tell you folks, I've been talking like this. I'm a Republican, and all you people probably are too. But I admire work wherever I find it.
I heard Mrs. Roosevelt speak to the Girl Scouts in Dixie. That was the most wonderful speech I ever heard. And also, Franklin D. used to be at the horse show, St. Rhinebeck, and they had a mound built so that his car could go up high and he could see down, so that the railing and the fence wouldn't be in his way.
Isn't that
I
interesting?
liked it. He said that, of course, he was governor, he said at Washington Hollow, the next time I come up here, he said, "I'm coming from Washington." Well, he got to Washington, and he probably came to Washington Hollow, but I don't know, he just was passing through. But he was pretty sure of himself. He's the first Democrat I ever voted for.
Is that right? Let everybody else make a speech. Let everybody say something. Why not?
I wanted to ask how large the greenhouses were.
How large was the greenhouse, Norman?
Well, we had a greenhouse, there were two compartments to it. They run on the L shape. One run north and south, and the other one part run east and west. And there was about 80 feet long on each one of the apartments.
80
We
feet.
raised roses and all kinds of different flowers and so that we put out in the grave site and into the gardens in the summertime.
How was it heated in the wintertime?
Heat, hot water heat in the greenhouse.
Oh, boy. Somebody else asked questions and make a speech.
Well, I can tell you one real short one. Ruth and I was down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina in 1940. I was a new company commander of the I Company of the now old famous 9th Division. I activated it in 1940 while I was there. And we got orders that President Roosevelt was coming down so that we could see him and to inspect the troops.
Yeah.
And everybody be on the lookout. So we sharpened up for it. The weather, I think, was about 118 to 120 degrees. And I had men that were falling out like flies all over the place. But we
Wow.
were working for 4 days. So we would just be just right when the president came by and stopped and said, "Hi, you folks," or "How you doing?" The boys had their hearts set on it. Well, the president came by at the proper time and the right time. But he went past my little company there, and where my men had been working for 4 days, he went by about 50 to 60 miles an hour. So we got a quick glimpse after all our hard work.
Well, never mind. You did it in a good cause, and God will reward you, I know.
Yeah.
Somebody else make a speech. Let everybody make some kind of a speech. Wouldn't that be fun?
I was just wondering, Norman, were you, you must have been working for the Roosevelts when the King and Queen from England came.
Well,
Yes.
I'll tell you, and I've seen people from all over the world.
You saw the king and queen
I
there.
saw kings and queens and kings.
Name it, you have it.
Right.
I remember seeing the King and Queen. We went to Hyde Park the night that they were leaving, and they graciously were out on the observation, the end of the observation car, and they stayed there a long time. They had dinner with the Roosevelts. They had indicated Roosevelt's dinner on their train, and they were dressed in their dinner clothes. And everyone remarked how much lovelier the Queen was in real life than she was in her pictures. I remember those atrocious hats that queens have to wear sort of spoiled their faces. She was lovely. And also when John was president of Lions Club. Lions Club sponsored Mrs. Roosevelt here in Millbrook. She spoke at Bennett College, and we had dinner for her. The whole club did, but a few of us, the officers, had to entertain her first at a little cocktail party. We were just so jittery and scared to death about it and what we were going to talk about. We didn't have to worry because she put everybody, about 6 or 7 of us, she put everybody right at ease. You almost forgot who she was. I mean, forgot the importance of her.
That was great.
And I remember that evening when she spoke at Bennett, one of the things she spoke about was our relationship with Russia. She said, don't ever stop, don't ever shut off the dialogue between this country and Russia. Just keep talking.
That was great. Somebody else that got something to say? Everybody say something or tell us a joke or something. Why not? Let's have a family party.
Norman, were you working still for the Roosevelt estate when Eleanor died?
Yes, I was.
Where did they bury her anyway?
She's buried right in the gravesite with the president.
She was. Well, that makes a happy family burying ground. But I was so touched that he wanted the dogs always near their master. I love animals.
So the 2 dogs is buried right behind the president's stone in front of the sundial. They got 2 white markers, headstones, just the same as a person has.
Isn't that nice? And somebody else asked a question.
I remember in the Poughkeepsie, I don't know, Poughkeepsie paper. Well, Mrs. Roosevelt was in a coal mine. Someone, when they discovered, I remember said they said, my God, Mr. Roosevelt. And she probably would have gone to the coal mines and then out we did.
Yeah. Right. I know Mrs. Roosevelt came up to that little, what was it, that little theater that was made out of the old Methodist meeting house up there at Lisco. And she was there to some plays and everything when it was run as a theater. And she was very well liked. Everybody that saw her, everybody liked her. And they told a joke, I know, and she was out walking in Hyde Park one day, Miss Roosevelt was, and this drunk man came along and bumped into her, and she said, excuse me, move along, my good man. And he said, oh, but you're homely. Oh, but you're homely. And she said, move along, my good man, you are drunk. And he said, I know it, but I'll get over it. Oh, but you're homely. That was a joke that went around in those days.
Several times over the period of time, their grandson was in school, I called him to speak there. And the first time I ever heard him, almost the beginning, I guess, her speaking career, she had a very high-pitched voice, and a little nervous titter, sort of between a laugh and a giggle. And she overcame that because she took voice lessons quite some time, and her voice improved a great deal.
Norman, how many people, how many gardeners did they have working at the Roosevelt estate at their home?
How many gardeners?
Yes.
There were just 2 of us in the greenhouse, out of the greenhouse.
Your boss was an old schoolmate of yours, though, wasn't he?
That's right, Bill Flynn. When I went to work there, they said I wouldn't work there 30 years, and I worked there 30 days. I worked there 30 years and retired from there.
Hooray, that was great record. Anybody else that want to ask Norman a question?
Where are the greenhouses located? Are they still standing now?
Oh, yes, they're still there. They're still running.
Are they?
Oh, yes, they had supply flowers for the library and for the home.
I see.
Yeah.
That's great. Somebody else must have a question. We got a lot of brains here tonight.
The library is very, very interesting to go to. FDR library. Have you all been there?
What is that?
It was very interesting to go to the FDR library, Helen
It
said.
interested me in the library.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to say something?
Does anybody else have any comments they'd like to make or questions they'd like to ask Norman?
We were talking about how homely Mrs. Roosevelt, she finally had an accident, was knocked out with some toothpaste, was ugly, and after that she was
More than 50 years ago, that they used to have prisoners in there, and they lived in there all by themselves. Imagine that. And one cold winter night, one of the prisoners got the idea that they had plenty of wood. They had a stove fire there, got a good hot fire, and if he didn't pull some sort of use a poker or something, and got it hot, and he burned out a few of those bars that they had in those days at the window, and he got out. So when they came the next morning, he was gone. The fire was still there. But imagine in this day and age, putting a prisoner in a building and locking him in and going on forgetting about him for the night. Times changed, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought I still hope that maybe someday you could have that little jail because it is fireproof.
Well, it's a very attractive little building. It really is. It's cute to look at.
Somebody's running into it. You better get it pretty soon. It's took the corner of like the roof, you know,
That's right.
you didn't see that, man.
I don't think so.
Anybody go on a farm tour and see the jail history? The extension service, farm, company tour, all that.
I've taken it enough.
I'm going this year.
I don't know, I enjoy the country ones more than I do the city.
You still got time to sign up. There were 6 buses last year, about 45 people on each one. I remember, I don't remember a rainy day, but we had 2 very hot days. Yeah, I like the country tours. Maybe better than the city. I guess I've been on
Is that it?
Everybody talked about it.
Well, thank you very much, Norman and Louise, for your memories and of FDR and the Roosevelt family. Really appreciate it.
It's been wonderful to
I enjoyed looking at that one there.
It's been wonderful here tonight to meet all you people. It was just like a family meeting. I loved it. I loved every meeting. And then I bet you we're going to have some of Fran Altman's refreshments pretty soon, too. That'll be good.
And what were you going to say, Norman?
Frankie D would come in there, unless he was with some celebrities or something, but he'd come in there with a nurse and he'd taking us boys come down, talk to us, tell us how nice we look, what a nice job we were doing. But I'll tell you something, in the summertime it was beautiful there in that grave site. Over on the east side, there was 18 rose beds, all different kinds of roses, all along the hedge. Besides all the other flower beds, it was all out in bloom.
Boy, it must have seemed like heaven. But imagine a man of his authority and prestige calling over his workers and talking to them like they're his children. Isn't that beautiful?
Never missed when he come in that gravesite, he'd hoo-hoo.
Wasn't that nice?
Some celebrities or something like that. And if he come in there with his nurses, he never failed to talk to us boys. and tell us how nice it looked.
I like that. I'm always yoo-hooing at people. I like it. I love
Beautiful place in
people.
the summertime with all the flower beds all out in bloom, the rose beds all out in bloom. Got to work.
Worth it.
When you once got it licked, why, there was nothing to it. Once a week, we had one day a week, and that was on a Friday. You go in that gravesite and work.
That's
Mow-
right. You knew just what you were supposed to do,
Mow
didn't
the
you?
lawn, and take care of the flower bed, scuffle the soil all up, and each one of the flower beds and the rose beds. Yeah, we had that one day a week.
Anybody else got anything to say, Mr. O'Neill?
Well, we
Is it-
thank you both very much for this interesting program. We thank you, Norman and Louise.
Well, it's our pleasure. It's been wonderful. I just loved it. I hope you'll all come again next time. I'd clap you if I could. All I can say is thank you. Hallelujah.
And now we'll have some of Fran's beverages.
Yay.
No, now,